We're going to continue to talk about freestyle skills, what they look like, and how to see them. And so we've talked about upper body propulsion, we've talked about lower body propulsion, and now we're going to talk about timing and rotation. So there's kind of three different pieces that we need to discuss to really get a sense of what freestyle timing is all about. And so the first part is the arm-to-arm timing and how that changes depending on the speeds that swimmers are swimming. The second is the real purpose of rotation, which is to recover the arms, and we'll explain a little bit more about that and how that influences timing and how that changes with different speeds. And then we'll talk about timing in terms of the rotation and the pull, which is actually pretty similar regardless of the speed that swimmers are swimming at, and we'll take a look at what that looks like as well. So let's get into it. So when we take a look at distance freestyle, what we see is overlap timing. And you can see right here, both arms are in front of the body at the same time. And that's what's considered overlap because the arms are overlapping in the front of the stroke. And so what that does is from right here, more or less stops creating propulsion with the arms. There's a gap in propulsion until probably right about there where no propulsion is being created with either arm. And so when the arms overlap in front, the drawback is that you have gaps in propulsion. The benefit is it allows typically for energy saving, it's a little bit more of an efficient stroke. So in terms of the arm-to-arm timing at slower speeds, there's overlap in the front. And when one arm is working at a time and there's a period of time where neither arm is creating any propulsion. And that can happen when swimmers are really patient out in front. They wait to set up the catch, they wait to set up the stroke, and then they get into it, and then they pull. And then they wait, and then they pull. And so it can be really effective for longer distances because it's much more efficient than a sprint stroke where the timing is overlapped, which we'll discuss in a second. And it allows swimmers to generate a lot of speed. It's not quite maximal speed, but it's speed that can be sustained, which is ultimately most important in longer events. So when we start to discuss sprinters, that overlap is going to disappear. And now the arms are going to start to move more or less in opposition. And so when one arm is in the back of the stroke, the other arm is in the front of the stroke, and then switch to the other side. And so the benefit of that is that the gaps in propulsion between the arms start to disappear. So, and you remember the distance swimmer, there was a period of time where no propulsion was being created. Well, now, if you watch the hand, the right arm behind him, it's still probably creating propulsion until we're right about there. It's kind of lost in the hip. But as you can see, his left arm is already starting to produce propulsion. And so there's no gap. And so again, finishing the stroke here, he's starting to create propulsion with the right arm. And so the arms tend to move in opposition. And that allows for a more continuous application of force, more continuous propulsion, and that allows swimmers to create higher speeds. And that's why swimmers will use this strategy when sprinting. They always want to keep one arm moving water backwards. So by organizing the timing so that the arms are moving in opposition, it allows swimmers to do that. They can create propulsion throughout the entire stroke cycle, and there's no gap in propulsion. So that's how the arm-to-arm timing changes when moving from a really long, sustained stroke to a sprint stroke. And it's not a light switch, it's more of a dimmer switch, and you'll always see swimmers use different strategies depending on the speed that they're trying to swim. So next we'll talk a little bit about rotational timing. And so the reason that swimmers rotate is basically, if they try to stay flat, it's pretty much impossible to get your arm out of the water behind your body because the human shoulder joint is not built to do that. You can do it in fly, but that's only because you lift out of the water. And so you have to either lift out or rotate in order to get the arm out of the water. And so that's why swimmers do it. And so the recovery of the arm is going to be tied to the rotation. However, what happens is in order to create that either overlapping or oppositional timing we see in distance events and sprint events, swimmers have to change the timing of the arm recovery. And so in both cases, what happens is the arm recovery will start from a position of rotation. And in distance swimmers, what will happen is the recovery will just come through and then they'll rotate. Whereas in sprinters, as the arm is recovering, that's when they're rotating. And so we'll take a look at it here. And so you can see the arm recovery happens, and then when she gets to the front of the stroke, she rotates, especially right here. There's no rotation until right then, and then there's no rotation until she gets to the front. So that allows her to be a little bit more patient and execute the overlap timing. So if we watch what happens under the water, it's a little easier to see the timing. So arm recovery here, he's rotated to the side. arm recovers, he enters, and then the rotation happens. And so that's the difference between the distance stroke and the sprint stroke. So rotation happens, the recovery happens, and then the rotation happens in distance swimming. And so that's the timing of the rotation and the recovery for distance swimmers. Then when we take a look at it for sprinters, enters already rotated. And then you go to the other side, enters already rotated. So enters, and then as he enters, as he reaches full extension, he is already rotated rather than entering and then extending out. So he still rotates on that left side here so that he can recover the arm. You can see he's rotated up. He gets that arm recovered, and then as he's recovering, he's rotating back to the side so that he's already down once the hand really enters the water, and that allows him to initiate the pull right away so that there's no gap. So again, just to watch here, so pull, there's the rotation, no rotation, recovery, and then full extension, and then rotation. Whereas if we watch the sprinter, rotated, recovering, and then as the entry happens, already rotated back as opposed to extending forward and then rotating. And so that allows the distance swimmers to be more patient in the front of the stroke, which is what we want, and it allows the sprinter to be more aggressive in the front of the stroke, which is also what we want. So the recovery timing has to happen so that the shoulder can come up so that swimmer can get the arm out of the water. And then as they recover the arm, they're either going to be patient when they're a distance swimmer and then recover forward, or they're going to swing it around and recover as they rotate. And that's going to be a key difference in what determines the arm-to-arm timing, because that's the primary point of difference. So the last piece we'll take a look at is the rotation to pull timing. And so the swimmer gets to right about here, right when they're in the meat of the pull, the body is pretty flat, and then it rotates through as he pulls. So sets up the stroke, more or less flat, right as the arm crosses the shoulder, and then rotates through the pull. So one more time, sets up the stroke, rotates back, and now is pretty flat, and then is rotating as he pulls. Now with the sprinter, the same thing is happening. So starting to pull, now he's pretty flat, and then he's rotating through the back half of the pull. And so the rotation and pull timing is the same whether it's a sprinter or a distance swimmer. So we'll watch it one more time here with the sprinter. So he's rotated a little bit to his left here. Now he's flat, and now he's rotating more to his right as he pulls through. So the timing between the pull and the rotation is the same for sprinters and distance swimmers. That part doesn't change because that allows swimmers to put their arm in the strongest position, to use the strongest muscles of the back. If you've heard of the open armpit concept, that's what allows the armpit to stay open for that much longer so that they can create more propulsion as they go through each pull. So one more time here, we'll take a look with the distance swimmer. Rotating away from the pull there, and that's going to allow them to create a little bit more propulsion. And again, rotating through the pull. Go back to the sprinter here, rotating through the pull, rotating through the pull. So as we've discussed, arm-to-arm timing changes between distance swimmers and sprinters in that distance swimmers have more of an overlap timing where both arms end up in the front of the stroke at some point, and only one arm is creating propulsion at a time. And there's often a gap in propulsion between arm pulls. In contrast, sprinters, they shrink that gap until it's nothing or almost nothing, and in some cases, there's some overlap of the arm pulls, and that way they can create continuous propulsion on the water, which is going to allow them to swim faster. And swimmers have to rotate to get their arms out of the water without dragging the arm through the water, and they'll time that so that the shoulder is back as they lift the arm out of the water. So distance swimmers will keep it there, reach forward, and then rotate after they enter, whereas sprinters will swing it around, and as the arm is recovering, that's when they rotate so that they can create propulsion right away and eliminate that time gap. And so the biggest change that comes in timing is the timing of the arm recovery and the rotation, and that allows distance swimmers to be more patient in the front of the stroke and allows sprinters to be more aggressive in the front of the stroke. And then once it's time to pull, both swimmers are going to pull at the same time relative to their rotation so that they can get a really strong pull. and take advantage of the muscles of the chest and the back for as long as possible to create as much propulsion as possible with each stroke. Timing can seem really complicated, but in truth, it's actually pretty simple. All you got to do is remember those 3 key timing points and the differences between sprinters and distance swimmers, and you'll be good to go. As always, keep it simple.